Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly recap of all things. We're back with our weekly Q&A video. It's not a weekly recap of all things injustice. It's actually
it's the wrong day of the week.
Yeah, it's the wrong day of the week, and it's any amount of injustice talk we want it to be. And this week, there's going to be some injustice talk, but there's going to be definitely some not injustice talk.
Yeah.
I think there's two things that I kind of wanted to talk about. One at slightly more length, one more briefly. Let's maybe start with the brief one. We sometimes like to talk about stuff that's been going on in the world. And there's two things that really stand out to me recently happening.
Sure.
TikTok might be getting banned in the US. It's seeming increasingly likely that a ban will happen. I say increasingly, but not necessarily any specific odds, because I just simply don't know.
Right.
But that's been happening, and people have been swapping over to the Chinese Red Note app, I believe. It's not the Chinese version of TikTok. It's sort of, my understanding is that it's almost like an Instagram sort of similar version.
Yeah.
And so people are there's a lot of interaction between Chinese nationals and United States nationals,
Right.
Having sort of interactions with each other for the first time. So that's been a little bit interesting. And the other thing that I actually want to talk about is the news coming out surrounding Neil Gaiman.
Okay, so I think a lot of the points have been hashed and rehashed over and over.
Yeah.
The one thing I do want to point out, and I'm going to maybe be open with my bias, I collected a lot of Neil Gaiman books. I went to a lot of his events when he was just starting out, when he just done Black Orchid and started Sandman, like from the very beginning.
Yeah. And you also raised me on Neil Gaiman books.
Oh, sure. The books are great. Clearly, the man himself is not what he appeared to be. And so the one part that I want to talk about is that there's a funny pattern for a lot of discourse. There's going to be a lot of people who are disappointed. And then every once in a while, you have these people jumping up and saying, hey, what happened to innocent until proven guilty? What happened to, letting somebody decide in a court of law and have it be more than he said, she said. And that's fine. I mean, people have already gone over the obvious parts where that's just legal part. That's where if you want to punish them and, whatever. I think the part that doesn't get emphasized enough in some of the discussions is the problem is with what Neil Gaiman wrote. Yeah. He clearly knew better. And his brand was being... a large part of it was being a decent human being.
Yeah.
And he's come out today, I think, on his blog with a statement about what happened. And he doesn't actually... I think he doesn't go far enough to deny it. He says, he makes the noises like, well, there's some things that are categorically not true. I've never had non-consensual relationships like that with anybody. But I think unless he actually denies knowing these people or that anything happened, what really comes through still is that he took advantage of people in vulnerable positions.
Yeah.
There was a huge power dynamic. A power differential in their dynamics. Mm-hmm. And that goes entirely against his entire, I would say something more significant than brand, but what he sort of built his
public facing ethos and value system. Right. And yeah.
Right. So I think that's why it hits a little bit harder and why it doesn't need to be nearly as like J.K. Rowling. She didn't really have that much of the same kind of brand. Like, I mean, if people took what they got from Harry Potter and what it meant to them, the fact that she's a TERF is in some ways...
It's not wholly inconsistent with her books. There's nothing in her books that say trans people are awesome.
Yeah. So, I don't even know what point I'm trying to make is that she's just another example of an author who's disappointed people. And I think this is specifically a problem. The people that are standing up for Neil Gaiman, I don't think get this point, is that, so yeah, sure, it's public opinion and stuff, but there's enough there that if part of the reason that he enjoyed what he did was because of the kind of person that he presented himself to be, huge disappointment. Listen, it doesn't change the fact the book Stardust is great. The movie Stardust is great.
Yeah.
Coraline, Good Omens, all really good books.
I would go further to say that there's a difference between sort of legal liability and, to me, like gross behavior, right?
Yeah.
I think the laws are sometimes a good place to look at how you're judging character for stuff that we sort of agree upon as a group, and that in places that I agree with the laws. But there's more stuff than just the laws, right? You talk about the things that have been illegal over different times, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about just, like homosexuality,
Orson Scott Card,
loitering, all these other things related to sort of like racism, race policy. You think about all the times that the laws of the time, there's a lot of laws governing slavery, right? And how slavery works, right? Those are all rules, which is just to say that laws can be a useful shorthand when you agree with them, but it's not just that. The situation as it's laid out, even in the case that Neil Gaiman genuinely believed that the relationships were entirely consensual, you have a situation with the main sort of person being discussed in the Vulture article, right? Of somebody who is young, who is homeless,
very vulnerable.
Yeah, who was not being paid appropriately and was chosen to be a nanny with no clear sort of pay, to millionaires, right?
No proper boundaries.
There was no proper boundaries, and in that case, then they engage in an intimate relationship. And what I would say is that at a baseline, that is a really, really bad, irresponsible place to, as the millionaire, as a person in a position of really high degree of power, it's a really bad place to start the relationship.
Yeah.
Even if everything was entirely enthusiastic and there was no anything, right?
Yeah.
And I would go further than that and say, if that person comes out of that relationship and feels gross or wronged, I would say they have been wronged, right?
Sure.
Whether it's in a legal sense, right? A legally actionable sense, whether there's, sort of like a monetary or criminal, sort of component of damages, right? That the state decides. I would say on a personal level, for me, I look at that situation and say, if they feel badly about that situation enough to the point that they are saying that they were wronged, right? Whatever language they were using, they were wronged. There is something here that is not okay. So the fact that that's not, like, he's not denying that they knew each other categorically or that relationship or anything, and just saying, well, I thought everything was okay.
Okay. So,
to me, it doesn't, that's bad enough. Whether or not he's ever criminally liable for something, that is gross and unacceptable from my own moral perspective.
And that's totally fair. I think, so I've probably been digging around a lot more in this because I think this sort of mattered to me because the first time this had happened, where a writer of something that I really, really loved and that I felt was formative disappointed me, when you mentioned, homophobes.
Yeah.
Orson Scott Card.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there's a difference, and that's the part I wanted to get at, where, because all the stuff that you're talking about, again, not to make light of it, but I think it's been discussed sort of in all the places that I'm looking. To me, there isn't anybody else who's managed their persona the same way as Neil Gaiman, who's presented himself as an ally to a lot of marginalized groups, as somebody who's a good guy who helps out. And see, the difference is with Orson Scott Card, I was disappointed, but not nearly as disappointed, because Orson Scott Card never made himself out to be anybody great.
Yeah.
He was, Ender's Game was great, Speaker for the Dead was better, and everything else after that, to me, was not nearly as good as Speaker for the Dead.
Yeah.
But they were great. Like, they were, again, formative to me. Like, there's things that I saw in Ender's Game that really, really hit me. And it disappointed me that somebody who's capable of that kind of insight would be as intolerant and bigoted, and support the hatred of people. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't Neil Gaiman. Right? Like, Neil Gaiman made his brand being good to people, going to readings, making everybody in the line feel like they were somebody worth talking to.
Yeah.
Like, it was all, I don't know. So to me, it's easier to really say, yeah, I don't care if there's anything illegal or, I don't need to hear more proof. There's enough of what I've heard that has been either corroborated or left into by the, right? And there's a lot, empty spaces, right? Where Neil Gaiman gets to say a bunch of stuff without actually addressing any of the specific points.
Yeah. So that's where we come down on it. And like, obviously I believe the victims, right? Yeah. That's the sort of baseline. I mean, Neil Gaiman made a tweet about believing victims in 2018 that people are recirculating, right?
Sure.
But separate from that, regardless of the specific combination of facts and information that come out, there is already enough here for me to say unequivocally that there was some gross, unacceptable behavior that happened here. And I am not the criminal justice system, right? I do not need to find him legally responsible.
Right.
I am forming my own personal opinion, right? Based off of the information that's presented to me. Part of it, statements made by Neil, right? Yeah. And the intersection of those, I have made my decision about whether or not I'm okay sort of continuing to like support this guy, right?
Yeah.
As an artist in his future work. And we had a sort of conversation earlier. I think this is the last point that I want to make about it, which is that it's horrible that this stuff happened, right? Mm-hmm. The sort of next thing that I'm thinking and hoping for is what is the best outcome where we are now. Yeah. What is the best outcome, and what is the best outcome that I am in any position to contribute to in any meaningful way? And to me, the best outcome here is that there are consequences for abuse, and that this is a positive example for people who are hurt or abused, right? Mm-hmm. To feel empowered to come out about their stories, or to find sort of justice and peace for themselves, right?
Right.
Because I'm unlikely to be in a position to do anything else. But like, other than contribute to the cultural conversation, I'll say that like, I hope that there are consequences to this. And I hope that the outcome of this is that, in the same way that the Me Too movement made space for people to come out about their own experiences, I hope that this is going to show and make space for people to come out about their experiences and feel empowered to do something. And so, as much as anything else, I think the only way that this is sort of my largest platform, other than talking with people who agree with me, because if anybody had a different stance than me in my personal life, that would not be a friend that I would want to have. So this is just the space where we say that we believe them and we hope there are consequences, and I hope that this type of harm is made less common in the future. In the long term and short term by stuff like people coming out and there being consequences.
Sure. Additionally, I'm going to hope that... All right, so what's actually happened is, because of this, he is going to lose a lot of access to vulnerable people now.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping is that this kind of punishment will matter to him a lot. He spent so many years creating and curating this persona to have the access. I hope it hurts him to lose it. And it might not be, that won't be enough, right?
Yeah.
But I hope it matters enough. Like, it's like when you're raising kids and you pick the kind of punishment that will matter to them. Like that, I hope that this is, who knows, right? Like, he's already rich. You cut off his sources of income. He can't make any more significant money off writing bestsellers and stuff. Well, whatever, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how people are going to keep on buying his books, or just are going to remain intentionally unaware of what's going on. But I hope that this sort of culture that he's cultivated over so many years of where, basically he's a rock star, right? Like, he was in the science fiction fantasy world, in the literature world, almost, maybe. He was a rock star. And that's taken away from him. I hope that hurts.
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, like, I think there's a sense of justice in that, but I don't know if that does any good,
Well, it's something I can hope for that can actually happen, right? Like,
that's true.
The other stuff is, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I know what's happening now. I'm just hoping that what's already happened is going to matter.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's fair. Okay, so one more non-injustice thing, at least.
Oh, yeah, right.
Cobsterd1918 says, I'm typically a lurker as well.
And this is a question we've already read once.
A question from a very long time ago. And
5 months ago.
Yeah, but I have to mention I absolutely love Annihilation, so it's always nice to get recognized. We were talking about movies, and I say, I know you mentioned you guys aren't necessarily major film fans in the sense that you feel like you should watch older films and whatnot, but I definitely recommend you two to watch It's a Wonderful Life if you haven't already, especially because it gives that warm, sentimental feeling that you two seem to really enjoy from movies. The only unfortunate thing is it's a Christmas movie, so the mood might not be right, but who doesn't like Christmas in July? I would assume you guys may have heard of it before, but if not, it's from 1946, and I don't think it feels super old/dated, but that may be a bit of my film bias speaking. Either way, its core themes are a staple for any Christmas movie and will always be relevant, so I would definitely recommend it to you two guys, to you two, if you guys are interested. So there we go. And based off of this comment and this comment alone, we did actually watch It's a Wonderful Life this past Christmas season. Yeah. And we mentioned it in the past. We're a little bit, out now. But we figured we'd give a little space to say thank you for the recommendation.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting.
It was. I thought that it was more than enjoyable enough for a one-time watch. I think I didn't feel let down or disappointed by it as a recommendation at all. I thought it was interesting, and I thought for how old it was, there was a lot of ways in which it didn't feel super dated. I think it's a fair comment. I think there's, for the time that it was written in, there was more of it that worked than I was expecting, and some of it was definitely a little weird or uncomfy.
That's okay. So maybe I want to speak to that part. Because listen, I appreciated the recommendation. I'm glad I watched it. It was an important kind of thing to have watched.
Yeah.
There were, I don't watch a lot of old movies, so I don't know how many other movies from that time would have rubbed me the same way. But there were moments where it was clearly the intention of the story for, was it George?
Yeah.
To be sympathetic. And if it had been closer time where we watched it, I would have been able to speak more coherently.
And there's a couple times where he was very much not sympathetic.
He was just very, absolutely. And I think the argument gets made a lot of times with stuff like that. It's, well, he was of the time.
Yeah.
But I think that there are lots of examples, whenever I hear that argument, there's lots of examples of those times where people were better. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a choice. I don't know that it was just that kind of behavior was really as widespread. Definitely condoned.
Yeah.
But maybe not as widespread as people would like you to think. Mm-hmm. I mean, even back when, there was a lot more blatant racism in the 60s, as an example, there were still people who were fighting against it. Mm-hmm. And not people who had a it wasn't all black people. Yeah. There were white people who were fighting it and suffering, and it came at a cost. Mm-hmm. So there were still decent people. So we say they were of the time. Yeah, maybe it was.
Mm-hmm. I think the story was interesting. I think I agree, and it's hard for me to judge because it's so far before my time. And I think you talk about norms, and you can understand that something was not okay then and now, but understand that people would not have seen it as not okay then.
Sure.
In aggregate, right? Even if sort of specific people had different stances. But I think one of the things that I found really interesting about it was how the payoff was a lot different than I was anticipating it. Just because it felt like, for one of the things that felt most dated, other than some of those moments, especially sort of like the gendered dynamic moments, right? The relationship moments, for the main romance, was how slow the main character was to understand the conceit. And it felt to me, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but it felt to me as if, because this movie was so much older, that the high concept, sort of complicated, media contrivances, were less sort of normalized. And so the amount of time that he was, spoilers for It's a Wonderful Life, I guess.
So wrapping his head around what was happening?
Wrapping his head around what was happening in the back, third of the movie, right? Where he was like, you're not a guardian angel. My car is gone. The notch in the car is gone. Sure. Let me go to the restaurant or the bar, and it's owned by a different person, and all this stuff, and everything's different. And the amount of time it took for him to internalize the conceit that he was never born. He is now living in a world where he was never born. Yeah. Took so much time. And I feel like in a modern movie, you would adopt that so much faster. And I think, like, as a belief, right, you might not believe it, but you would at least understand the conceit that was the space that you were in, that it was, maybe it was a prank, and that, everybody was making you like feel like that, but you might doubt the reality of it, but you wouldn't have a hard time coming to terms with the conceit of the situation. Right?
100%. No. I think that, and that didn't bother me, because 100%, there's stuff that happens, and it's like a lot of times when somebody recommends something that's classic, and the reason why it was classic is because it was the first thing to do a certain thing, then everybody else sort of incorporates that into the way they tell their stories.
But what I think is interesting is, I think if a modern film tried to do that, you would either have that acknowledgement of what was happening
100%.
much faster,
100%.
but it also would read as unbelievable, because I think it's just the fact that, we have so much more media where they're doing stuff like that, that now you expect your characters in a piece of media to understand it quickly, because we understand it quickly, right? And so there's a lot more there's a lot more space in newer stuff to have a lot higher concept, a lot more twisty, turny, complicated conceits that are meant to be sort of taken in stride by the characters.
It happens all the time. I mean, what you'd expect in a modern retelling is that the character would be skeptical. They would understand the idea. They would acknowledge that it was unlikely, and then they would be skeptical, express their disbelief, and then they would carry on. I think I've seen that sort of strategy in other movies where they handle it. I mean, if you don't acknowledge the fact that there's, say, a big coincidence or, whatever, something that's hard to believe. Yeah. If you do it first within the story, then you allow the audience to let go of that and not have to think it up themselves and have that sort of working at the back of their brains while they're trying to enjoy the story and suspend their disbelief. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, so just interesting, but it was. I enjoyed my time with it overall.
I appreciate the recommendation. Thank you.
I don't know if it'll become a sort of tradition for us. Mm-hmm. But what might become a tradition is the Holdovers. We watched the Holdovers this season. It was great on a rewatch too. Anyways, we won't talk about that too much. Maybe in the future. Yeah. Because I think we're gonna get back into. Or you wanted to do one more question?
Do we have time? Let's do it real quick. All right, so Ryan Pajes de la Cruz 8254 says, "Hi, I've been watching your vids recently and appreciate the info that you're giving. Not to mention you're doing this for years already. Just a quick question. I noticed that cards you're using on the vids that I watch anyways are all E7. Is there a disadvantage on making them promoted to 10? Just wanted to know your thoughts about it. Thank you." And somebody actually replied, it was Luckman Official. "My initial thoughts are the higher your card, the more it puts you against higher tier enemies. So keeping it E7 and maxing stats might be better for fights than going E10 and ending up with harder opponents." And that's true as far as it goes, but there's sort of two important additional points. One is you need to be facing high enough enemies to get max battle points. Once you get past that point, you don't get any benefit, and you're just making your fights harder. So it is making the fights harder, but a lot of times, if you make your fights harder, you're getting more benefit when you're working at the lower levels, right? So you don't want to just win fights and have it be all bronze. Because, I mean, you could if that's what you're able to win.
The main advantage is actually that when you have your guys all at Elite 7, you can have a character that has much lower base stats who's still a gold, like an older gold, for example, at a higher elite level. It's easier to reach approximate parity in terms of stats across all of your team members.
That was going to be my third point.
So
that makes it easier to experiment with characters, right? So that you're not limited by, well, this character's too weak to be useful on team. It gives you more opportunities to play in that sandbox, to manipulate the teams and play stuff that may not be intuitively obvious as combinations. The second one was, if you're still thinking of offline play, having higher stats is helpful because you're facing fixed stat opponents. So you also not only want it to be high enough to get max battle points in multiplayer, you also want it to be high enough to get to be effective and use in offline play if you're going to be using them to get through the levels, to farm credits, to farm experience for your other team members.
That's true.
So there was a time where if they're good enough, then you can use them to carry along 2 bronze characters, so you can max out your bronze characters too.
Yeah. So in general, there's just no benefit to having them Elite 10 instead of Elite 7. And there is some benefit to having them Elite 7 instead of Elite 10.
Well, and when we say benefit, we're defining it for ourselves. I think for some people, their goal of the collecting part of the game is to get everything as powerful as it can. So max attack by augmentations, max health, max crit chance, max crit damage, max elite, max level.
It's true. There's no benefit outside of sort of it being done.
Yeah.
Checking something off a list, other than being able to say that you did it, there's no material benefit.
I guess that's... All right, so hold on. Maybe that's not entirely fair. The other benefit is in offline play. It does make it easier. So
that's true, but it's pretty marginal. And offline play is not the main space that we're... Yeah,
and most of the time it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Because you can make it marginally easier, but it's really not necessary. I think you can really get through... I mean, people are forgetting sometimes that Elite 5, level 40, used to be the maximum promotion and level that you could get for characters when it only went up to bonus battle 6.
Yeah. So there we go.
Yeah.
And so I think for the remainder, I don't know, next 5 minutes, we were working through gears, all the 3.5-star gears, the 3-star, which become 4-star gears, and talking about how we felt about each of them.
So last time we got to the hyperspeed plated suit, that brings us up to Kondak Royal Garb, which when maxed out gives you 22% health increase, 30% chance to crit on special 1, 30% life drain chance on special 1.
And that last one is only for Black Adam.
Right. I think this is actually a good gear for Black Adam.
Yeah.
It's not good for most people. It's not a generally good gear, but it actually makes Black Adam better by specifically addressing both his weakness and his strength.
Yeah.
So the health increase acknowledges that Black Adam has relatively not only low stats but low health, makes him a little bit delicate. The 30% chance of crit on special 1 and the 30% life drain chance on special 1 also acknowledges one of his strengths, where his special 1 seems like it's doing more damage proportionally than he should, because his special 2 is so weak. So he's a character, if you're going to be doing specials, you're going to be doing a lot of special 1s, and you not only do you do a decent amount of damage by increasing the chance to crit, you're also getting a status effect.
Yeah, that life drain for sure.
So it's not synergistic in general, but it's synergistic for sure for Black Adam, because that, boosting health and crit chance on special 1, that's not really a thing for anybody else. Mm-hmm. Not the same way.
Next up, we have the Butcher's Knife, which becomes the knife collection. When it's maxed out, it gives you a 70% damage boost to basic attacks. You heal self for 15% on special 1, and a Solomon Grundy specific ability of 25% unblockable chance on basic attacks. It's alright. Basic attack damage is good.
I will say, though, that until you've got Tentu Totem, I feel like this is one of the really great 3.5-star gears. And let me say why. So the two abilities, the 70% damage boost, once you've maxed out your crit chance with either your augmentations or your other gears, then you just want to boost basic damage sometimes. If you're not going to be having a special focused character, even if you have a specialist on your team.
Yeah.
70% basic damage boost is the highest you can get. You could stick another gear that has increased crit chance for basics, but if you don't need it, I mean, the only reason you'd sort of stack even more crit chances if you're afraid that you're going to lose it with gear sharing, and that's doesn't happen enough to be a concern. And the unblockable chance on basic attacks, if this weren't a Solomon Grundy,
the main issue has nothing to do with this gear, and more that Solomon Grundy is terrible to play.
So I definitely use this gear on a lot of teams on the basic damage dealer as a third gear to boost damage even more, and then getting a little bit of bonus by healing a bit on special 1. It's not the most important thing, but really the key is getting that 70% damage boost if I've already got 100% crit chance.
Yeah. So this has like one good ability, basically.
Yeah.
We have the Kryptonian suit, which becomes a Kryptonian battle suit, gives you a 22% health increase. You heal self for 25% on special 2, and a Superman specific ability, which is a 25% chance to reflect a special 2 while blocking.
Yeah.
And in the same way that the last one is worse because it's Solomon Grundy, this one is better because it's Superman, because there are so many Supermen, right?
Right.
So many gold Supermen too. So even when you're later into the game, it's like the Superman and Batman gears naturally have such a big advantage just in terms of the number of people that you get that extra ability for.
And I think maybe for the knife collection, I forgot to say specifically, is that because Solomon Grundy is so slow, the only viable basic attack is his tap attack.
Yeah.
And when you only do tap attacks and you want a basic damage dealer, it doesn't work. If Solomon Grundy were just a little bit faster, I would love the previous gear more.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But anyways, this one. So health increase and heal self is not great. You know, it's not bad for defensive, right? They're on sort of the same style, and reflecting special 2 while blocking. This is all sort of defensive tank gear stuff. Yeah. And I think it's serviceable as a tank gear, right?
Yeah.
It's not bad at all, but we don't love tanks because in general, best case scenario, they're slowing down the fight, right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of something that you could imagine putting on a team, but probably the more you play and the more stuff you have, the less you need this gear, right? Because this is probably better the earlier you get it, when having a tank might make more sense.
Right.
Do you want to do like maybe 1 or 2 more gear?
Yeah, at least 1 more. So Kryptonian Rifle has an 18% damage boost to Special 1, a 30% crit chance on Special 2, and for Zod has a 100% area effect of opponent's team taking 25% damage from Special 1. Not enough Zod skins for that Zod ability to matter. Neither of the Zods are good enough that 25% damage, splash damage on Special 1 is going to do it for me. I have been known to use this every once in a while on, say, Rebirth Raven on a character like a secondary special specialist where, depending on what power I steal, I might be wanting to do Special 1, I might be wanting to do Special 2. And it's not a bad compromise where you can boost both of them in different ways. So you get a damage boost on Special 1, which is less meaningful because all that 18% does, it's like, it doesn't actually multiply your damage and increase it by 18%. What it means is that whatever you do in the minigame, if you swipe 200% or tap 200% on whatever minigame you do for Special 1, you get 218%. And so that really amounts to sometimes as little as only 9% boost of the amount of damage we're going to do anyways, which is not meaningful in the game. But the 30% crit chance on Special 2 is meaningful, especially if it's what gets you from 70% to 100%.
Mm-hmm. So there we go. Do you want to call that one here?
Yeah, let's call it.
Okay. So to finish up, we'd like to give a couple of thank yous. First off, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our wonderful patrons on Patreon.
That would be Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, and Nora Klimek, who are supporting us on the credited level.
And then second off, we'd like to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports us, however you support us. So that is at the very least, if you're listening to this, making it all the way to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Komoda!